Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture, and now it's the last of our year-end list, the top 25 best albums of 2018. Normally, this is the list that feels like the greatest relief for me to make. It's a final moment where we can lay a year to rest chronicling the best of the best. The sort of release that comes with it being the last list, but also the one that feels the most professional, for lack of a better word, hence the tie. I'm having fun with the list of the best and the worst hits. I'm getting a little bit more personal with the overall songs list. This is for critics staking claim, drawing our lines in the sand, and as such, it's normally the most professionally rewarding for as much as any of this is. But I gotta say, in comparison to previous years, this list was not that hard for me to make. Even though I covered far more albums in 2018 than ever before, it felt like I hit greatness less often on average, which is probably not completely true, but it sure as hell felt like it, especially given that the cuts just weren't all that painful this year, or it certainly seemed like there was a less of them to make in comparison with, say, 2017. And while I don't really do an honorable mention segment for this list, I will say I'm a little bit regretful I have to leave off Rollo Tomasi and Against All Logic off this list, and I'm sure I'm going to surprise some people by saying that Beach House and Casey Musgraves also missed the cut. Sorry, but especially in country, Casey had some stiffer competition. But really, if we're looking to highlight a genre that turned out in spades in 2018, it was hip-hop. And no jokes here, there is more hip-hop on this album's list than I think there's ever been before in terms of pure percentages. Which, yes, means that there were two painful cuts in the form of Marlowe and Arm & Hammer, but you know what? Let's start off with hip-hop here. Number 25. The first two albums on this list are comebacks, so to speak, both from acts that took long absences and have returned with renewed focus and verve. And this one in particular shines all the brighter because of it, especially as he seems all the more conscious of his absence, but is gonna make sure that it was all worth the wait.
Something that's on my mind is something I gotta find, and I got to find that down again. Yes, sir. 1, 2. What's you? Yo.
It seems like for a lot of folks, Phonte's No News is Good News flew under the radar, and I'll admit that frustrates me, but doesn't exactly surprise me. Mostly because Phonte is making cool music that's not exactly trendy. The terms that most thrown around here is grown man hip-hop. That's a little bit older, catering to an older audience, that's a lot wiser and willing to embrace old school grooves and bars, while still sounding very much contemporary with a lot of polish. It's a brisk listen, and by the time you reach its end, you can be thrown off by how much maturity and insight that Phonte's managed to wedge in between the lines when it comes to making it sound so damn easy. But for something that goes down this smooth, it's hard to ignore how damn infectious it is. Mark my words, in 20 or so years, there's gonna be a whole lot of older hip-hop critics and fans enshrining this as an overlooked classic when they might not have been on board at the time. And when it's this good, I want to be first on the right side of history. Number 24. If you had told me 5 years ago that this band was going to make my list with this change in trajectory, I'm not sure I would have believed you. Even if you had told me that their collaborator, whose influence definitely lingers over this entire project, was working here. But having heard this album now, yeah, there's no room for me to complain when it's this good.
When you get out of bed, don't end up stranded, horrified with each stone on the stage, my little dog.
I can make a credible argument that Little Dark Age is MGMT's best album. Yes, better than Oracular Spectacular and Congratulations. Both solid, but top-heavy in favor of their singles where the pop focus came more into view. But that's the point. Those albums were only glimpses of it, whereas Little Dark Age embraces the gothic, fleshy weirdness of Ariel Pink's brand of music for a lot of welcome texture in order to accent that main pop focus, which is now at the core where it always belonged. It's an album that's taken the weird, collegiate psychedelia of their previous albums and then buries it in a post-grad morass that's willing to look and sound murky and unstable in the best possible way. It is absolutely an artistic pivot for them, and I know it won't be for everybody, especially if you like more of that rock side, but for MGMT, finally playing to their strengths, that was the best possible decision, especially to come back. Number 23. It feels strange putting what some might brand as an EP on this list. Granted, it's longer than projects that were deemed full albums that will also make this list, and when the bars are this good, who's gonna complain?
Pocket full of shells, bucket full of balls, and shotgun golf. Let's hit one for Hunter, y'all, like boom! That shotgun golf, boom! That shotgun golf!
So I've already talked about this project at length, and it kind of feels like I was one of the only ones shouting its praise, especially on YouTube. It should be so much bigger than it is. Sage Francis and B. Dolan have the sort of intellectual chemistry, activist fervor, and sheer creativity that make them natural friends and great personalities opposite each other on the mic. And season 1 takes the independent hustle and fuses it with a retro glitch and alien sense and a revolutionary spirit that felt absolutely needed in 2018. This was only the primer for a full-length album dropping in 2019, and you know what? You're all out of excuses to not get on board. This rules. Number 22. So one thing you might notice on this list is that my tastes are starting to skew a little bit older, for lack of better words. I'd argue I've always kind of done this. At heart, I'm a country guy, and the best stuff in that genre can definitely lead on an older demographic. But like with Phonte, if we're looking for the sort of project that will remain powerful and heavy in 10 or 20 or 30 years, that also happens to be a comeback in its own way.
The further I get, the further I go. This interstate gospel is saving my soul. This interstate gospel is saving my soul.
Look, in damn near any given year, the Pistol Annies would have a shot from my year-end list. The sheer pool of talent is too great to be denied, and with Interstate Gospel ditching so much of the theatrics for an older, world-weary sense of maturity that moved a lot of the subtext into the text for a more expansive and strikingly dark listen, all three of these women prove they are forces to be reckoned with in country, even if Nashville and Music Row are too much of cowards to put them on the radio. The writing is top-notch, the harmonies they're striking, their band has never sounded better in its embrace of more lush country textures and a warm, burnished atmosphere, and really they're given the space to do a lot here, and with gut punches of performance and content that seem to go on for days, Interstate Gospel is the best sort of return to form that we could possibly get, and one I did not expect from the Pistol Annies. I didn't expect they'd put out another album together, but one that absolutely deserves a lot of very real attention. Number 21. But if we were to shift back to the topic of riotous music that was just the balm I needed for uncertain times, the Wonder Years lost a fair amount of fans this year with Sister Cities, taking a cautious step away from the pop-punk of their roots in order to embrace darker swells of atmosphere and a more somber, borderline mature alternative rock vibe. And while I'm still not sure they managed to top 2011's Suburbia, which remains my personal favorite of their albums, Sister Cities grabbed a hold of my psyche and did not let go. An album that dives headfirst into the storm and is darker than ever, but then still lets that sense of optimism and hope shine through all the brighter, and proves all the brighter in its contrast. It is absolutely a shift in sound. I'm not normally the one to praise a band for moving away from punk in order to find maturity. Punks can be mature too, folks, just the sound. But when you know what, if it kicks this much ass, I'm not about to complain. It's definitely underrated by way too many people. Definitely check this out. Great album. Number 20. But for as much as I've highlighted and celebrated music with a sense of maturity on this list thus far, I would not say it's universal. Sometimes the kids know it's very much not alright, and even if they're smuggling the message in under the radar, you should all be listening.
Left side, pulled out that life. Right side, pulled out that life. Nighttime, pulled out the guy outside. In out my mind.
Full disclosure, this was the project that won me over on Vince Staples as the sort of artist that deserves far more serious scrutiny and critical conversation beyond just highlighting how much it bangs. Which, of course this does with an undeniable West Coast flavor, but there is so much more going on here that needs to be highlighted. It is an album that simulates the desensitizing effect of mainstream radio glossing over the nameless men caught in the streets' carnage. And what's so ingenious about it, Vince Staples never shows his hand. A summer record released in November to drive its bloody hammer home, as he adds a chilling critique to those to seek to profit off the paranoia and violence in black communities for a predominantly white audience. All with a veneer of disposability that Vince Staples is too much of a brutal realist in order to dispel. Barely an inch of waste on this project, this is Vince Staples bringing his ear for detail with crushing precision. Again, this was underrated by entirely too many, and if you thought you misheard it, go back. It's worth it. Number 19. And while we're on the West Coast, let's flip over to a very different sound from earlier in the year.
Some think I'm clever, others think I'm the one who makes too many references to weather or not. Or not.
Evidence is Whether or Not was one of the first albums I praised to Helen back in 2018, and as the conclusion to the Weatherman trilogy, it was absolutely worth the wait. Delivering a flavor of meditative, sample-heavy West Coast boom bap overflowing with measured control, distinctive taste, and an impressive amount of modesty, along with some fantastic guest verses and a remarkable sense of cohesion to the whole project, Whether or Not is hip-hop for contemplation, and a refined taste indeed. Hard enough to entrench his lane, but with songs like Powder Cocaine and By My Side 2, shows the real emotive power that he can get by just stepping outside that lane. I've been a fan of Evidence for years now. He's made my list before, and be it solo or Dilated Peoples, this might be one of his best to date. Definitely slept on project throughout 2018. Check this out. Number 18. Of course, there's stability and understanding one's foundation, and then there's a group that had to deal with nearly all of that ripped out from underneath them. And yet, by some miracle, Brockhampton pulled it together and delivered their best album to date.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Take it like whoa, whoa, whoa. Talking to no, 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 no.
Yes, you heard me correctly. Iridescence is absolutely Brockhampton at their best, most because it takes them just far enough outside of their comfort zone to then zoom in on more of the angst, the insecurities, and give their bangers more of a real sense of stakes. There was always more of a raw side to every member of the group, even going back to the Saturation trilogy, but Iridescence just rips away all of those veneers to show their band at their most diverse, but also their most refined, using a major label budget to enhance and expand their sound, but also highlight just how precarious it can all be in its composition. And while it might be quite as overstuffed with bangers as that Saturation trilogy was, it trades a few for expanded nuance and genuine pathos that really won me over these guys, even more than their live show that I caught this year at Reading Festival. This is an album when Brockhampton was taken to the very brink, and you know what? When it's this good, I want to see where they go from there. Number 17. So I've already highlighted a few comebacks on this list, but there are two types of comebacks. The long absences from the spotlight, and the cases where the band might have gone down a path that might not flatter them, but then they choose to yank things back into line, back on the right path. And with this project, oh thank God Poets of the Fall did the latter.
And it feels like flying. It's a fool's paradise.
Alright, look, by the standards of Poets of the Fall, I would probably call this a mid-tier release. And the fact that it's still one of the best albums of 2018, it is absolutely proof that this band deserves so much more attention. And well, the most praise needs to be directed at the band themselves for reclaiming a lot of production control. Ultraviolet takes its increased pop focus to melody and more diverse instrumentation behind them to the sort of soaring heights that only they can really pull off. I've already talked about Fool's Paradise on a different list as one of their best ever songs, but Ultraviolet is chock full of huge hooks, better writing than they've often been given credit, and frontman Marco Seresto once again just sounding incredible. So glad that this band is back in form, so maybe can we get a little bit more of the metal or hard rock side to come back? I want to get a true classic from you guys. You're so close. Number 16. And back to hip-hop again. But you know what? For a record that was able to set off a firestorm and prove central to one of the biggest stories of the culture all year, and with the benefit of time to not feel dated or time-locked and still remain a pretty kick-ass album.
Get the table next to mine, make our bottle servers race. These are the games we play, we are the names they say. This is the drug money your ex-nigga claim he makes.
So I'll be the first to agree that Daytona's probably getting overpraised in some quarters of hip-hop. It is a damn great album, but it's not the best hip-hop of 2018. Just pace yourself. But I can make the argument that it's among the most pure hip-hop we got this year. There's no fat here. Kanye West delivering some of his best sample-driven production, and then sadly delivering a verse that holds this album back from embodying the true best of the year. And then there's Pusha-T, continuing to rise above so many of his contemporaries with some of the most tight and layered bars of his entire career. And what continues to place him above so many of his peers in this brand of cocaine-driven gangster rap is, while they might be able to paint a picture, Pusha-T knows how to shade it with nuance and a sense of very real danger to show the emotional toll and scars such a life might be able to live. And couple it with the best Rick Ross verse in years. Seriously, Push, get an EP or something with Rick Ross. You bring out the absolute best side in him. In other words, a tolerable side from him. And you know what? we've just got 7 songs of pure adrenaline that, out of all of Kanye's experiments and shenanigans this year, they'll definitely stand out as the best example. Number 15. This is an album that I think has been both overlooked and underanalyzed. Most because the more you dig, the more unsettling and heartbreaking the picture becomes. And yet, for as much as Josh Tillman has embraced deconstruction, it takes a real sense of daring to just bring it all home to roost.
Don't you remember me? I was God's favorite customer.
So let's forget the theories surrounding the sin lurking at this album's heart. The secret that Josh Tillman has never quite revealed, only because the album spells enough outright to give the clues. The fact that this album manages to stick the landing at all, that should be the real marvel. This is the most oblique and abstract that Father John Misty has ever been, despite the simpler language, against production and vibes designed to unsettle and alienate, with exposed fractures and obfuscation that only makes a tragedy cut so much harder when you get a grasp of what it is. And while I won't say my unsteady love for this project is entirely rooted in an intoxicated and entirely too relatable setting, sure as hell helped. In other words, while God's favorite customer will probably be seen as an anomaly in Josh Tillman's larger discography, it's not as good as I Love You Honey Bear or possessing the same scope as pure comedy. Well, to quote an artist who came behind him on this list, if you know, you know. I think 6 months later, I know. God damn it, Josh. Number 14. It would be very easy for me to plug this album into the whole comeback narrative of this list that was true for the Pistol Annies and Phonte and Poets of the Fall and MGMT. But the truth is, if you heard Emily Haynes' brilliant album Choir of the Mind last year, you knew this was coming. Art of Doubt is the best album Metric has made in about a decade and easily feels like the culmination of so much of their prior work, with a strong return to their synth-driven indie rock foundation with meatier grooves, better hooks, and a truly postmodern approach to songwriting and theme that only has netted them the strongest of dividends. And what's kind of incredible is the momentum and consistency in the power of this project. Wall to wall, some of the most anthemic and bruising rock songs of the band's entire career that pushes Emily Haynes to the limits of her vocal range, and some of their catchiest songs to boot. Factor in writing that is just as incisive, but also really accessible, and you've got the sort of rock-solid project that asserts that Metric as a Canadian indie rock staple. Really should be global at this point, but I'm willing to wait for those south the border to finally catch up. It's been a few decades. I'm not waiting that long, though. Number 13. I had so many doubts about this debut album. I really did, given the other project released from the revitalized label Monument Records that shall not be named. I did not have a lot of hope this would stick the landing. And yet, turns out not only did we get one of the best pop country albums of the decade, but when I'm this wrong, and I see this much promise, I can admit it.
You can burn out this Starfire.
This is the sort of debut with the flair, personality, terrific writing, and element of surprise that I haven't felt in pop country since Lucy Hale delivered Road Between from out of nowhere. And yeah, after dozens of listens to Starfire, I'm probably more excited for Caitlyn Smith. Bringing a distinctive husky vocal timbre with incredible power is one thing, you should see her live. But when you balance it out with such a distinctive, almost old-fashioned balance in her production between retro elegance and grounded, very almost indie country texture, Starfire becomes a wallop that has floored nearly everybody who's heard it, and it's absolutely the biggest indictment of Nashville's systemic failure to put women on the radio. For every lazy, pop-pandering, beat-driven waste of time from utterly generic and forgettable dudes, you couldn't find space for Caitlyn Smith just to blow them all out of the water? For goddamn shame, Nashville. For goddamn shame, Music Row. Because this debut, as part of the pun, real star power. Number 12. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Mark, these are all great albums, but I am noticing a suspicious lack of metal and heavier music on this list. What the hell happened? Well, yeah, that's true. And what's infuriating is it feels like I covered so much of it this year too, only just for precious little of it to really resonate more deeply for me. I tried, folks. I wanted there to be a fantastic, soaring black metal album to really click, or for a death metal project to really stick the landing, or for With Them Temptation to not delay their album the next February. But instead, Yeah, you know what? It's another comeback, but I don't think any of us could have seen this one coming. So if we're looking for a secondary theme running through many of these picks, it's hard to ignore a lingering sense of discomfort and dissatisfaction. And yet, not since The Terror by the Flaming Lips have we gotten an album so precisely engineered to unsettle an audience. And I'd argue this album is considerably better, certainly catchier, homing in on some of Daughter's most accessible and damn near catchy songs to date with some of these industrial, noisy elements in order to concoct an abrasive testament to unnerving content. It doesn't revel in human frailty and failure so much as it's just a taciturn acknowledgement of its ubiquity, leading to a project that might curdle in your stomach but still sticks with you all the same. And for a comeback nearly a decade in the making, yeah, this hit home. Didn't expect it, but man, I dig it. Number 11. So I've struggled to say whether or not this was a great year for country music, partially because I'm not sure I covered enough of it, but also because, with one big exception that we'll get to, most of the country I loved this year was very low-key and somber and mature. But you know what, if you could take some of those tones and give them a scope to sound and feel so much bigger?
May your kindness remain. Oh, may your kindness remain.
Courtney Marie Andrews had gotten me on board with Honest Life 2 years ago, but May Your Kindness Remain takes the same sort of vulnerable optimism that colored so much of Sister Cities by the Wonder Years and gives it the warm, atmospheric swell to match it. It's almost damn near post-rock, or recalling Casualties of Cool from back in 2014, and when you pair it with her tremendous voice and her ability to say so much by using such straightforward, understated language, it's just such a warm album that feels sweeping and huge and yet intimate in the best ways possible. To say it plainly, this is the sort of album that places her in the big leagues of indie country for those in the know, and has proven that she will be a force to be reckoned with in the years to come. And absolutely nobody can complain about this, cause yeah, this album, something special. Number 10. And you know, while we're on the topic of unshakable optimism that took a good formula and pumped it up on steroids,
There's snowflakes on avalanche. Dirty, rotten, filthy scum.
so I'll admit it's a little tough for me to outright praise Joy as an Act of Resistance by Idols as much as I would like, because if I am going to make a comparison to Brutalism, I will actually agree that the writing feels a little more straightforward and more laser focused on a very specific left-leaning demographic. But here's my counterpoint. If you're going to bring forth real nuance along the way anyway, still have a lot of populistic fervor that can grab up and recontextualize a genre like Oi for the modern world, and then bring in even more sounds, and then couple it with hooks that just span fist-pumping awesomeness, genuine heartbreak, and outright hilarity, and is endlessly quotable, is that complaint really going to hold you back from loving this? And in a year where I spent so much time learning to love 80s hardcore punk, Idols was the welcome shot of adrenaline that proved just how relevant that sound can be even now, and with a glowing spirit to match it. This snowflake can become an avalanche, and I'll be happy if this just buries the whole discourse beneath it. Number 9. But look, as much as I love Idols, it's a shot of adrenaline that's very political that doesn't exactly have the same long-lasting staying power. Eventually, you're gonna get tired, and you're gonna need the protection in order to cope, especially when you're in the modern age. It's not so much identifiable enemies as it is systemic pressure. So it's nice to see two of the smartest artists in hip-hop manage to find that balance.
My contribution to this game.
I'm wearing overalls, one shoulder off. Dwayne Wayne flip glasses, syrup for my cough. It's gonna be lit. I ain't wrote shit.
Jean Grae and Quelle Chris are so inhumanly talented as rappers, producers, and thinkers that their match is almost too perfect here, making the anthems to gritting one's teeth, finding moments just to breathe heavily and find a moment to relax, and provide that reassurance that so much of this oppressive system is built on shoddy foundations that can be so easily disrupted. But it also gets that sort of disruption to those systems can have cascading side effects, and there are untold layers of people who could be impacted along the way and who could be innocents, and even all those layers of complicated nuance can be tough and heavy to parse and bear. This is an album that promises no easy solutions beyond an outlet just to scream into the void, with off-kilter texture production and flows that are as complicated as the content, but also brought with just enough accessibility and humor in order to be grasped all the same if you're willing to put in the effort. And if this is actually Jean Grae's last hurrah for rap, man, what a way to go out. One of the best hip-hop albums of this year. Number 8. So this is an album that is tough to talk about. As a songwriter, this artist is in a class by herself, but I'm stuck inevitably making comparisons to previous albums that I have liked a little bit more, and I'm not sure that's always fair to her. But on the flip side, if you're comparing her to everyone else and she's still on this list this high, that kind of makes my point for me, doesn't it?
Young and angry again.
Laurie McKenna's The Tree is, again, one of those albums I think will play more to an older demographic more effectively than my own, or in 20 or so years it'll have a lot greater resonance. And it plays so much of what made The Bird and the Rifle so damn good to begin with, just this time with more of a focus on family dynamics, and for someone who is not a parent yet, it doesn't quite hit in the same way as the lonelier cuts on that last album did for me. But still, she's one of the best writers in country. Dave Cobb's production, while not quite as lush, does wonders in order to compliment her, and with a veteran like her in songwriting, there's just so few who are comparable with her unique voice, managed to cut through every time. And with that, she'll always have a spot on this list. Number 7. If we're looking for an album that surprised me the most in its quality this year, it'd be this one. It's also probably one of the most ambitious albums of 2018. And if you dig into its content, one of the most daring. I mean, it takes balls for an indie rock band to take indie rock archetypes and then actively set them on fire. If there is an album that is damn near suicidal, it is Near My God by Foxing, taking the structure of emo melodrama to the most overblown hypes to drunkenly careen off a cliff with some of the most explosive songs to date. And then we get the second half of the album, which doesn't let the band off the hook and decides to dig into the layered issues of antisocial behavior, entitlement, and abandonment issues for a society of bearded hipster types like them having a quarter-life crisis. And to damn near everyone looking in, it can scream as being utterly insufferable. This is not for everyone. But the songwriters, they know that, and they're willing to hold themselves to account with a populist rejection of privilege that is as much as they can muster as both forward-thinking and genuinely compelling. It's easily Foxing's weirdest project to date, but if you can get pulled into that world and that head rush, there's nothing quite like it. And that's why it's here. Number 6. It used to feel joyous whenever I praise this guy to hell and back. Now, thanks to bad buzz by completely misinformed reviews, I feel like I'm stuck playing defense to reverse a terrible narrative that might have taken hold. But you know what? Let this be my defining statement. Let's change that narrative.
She was a ricochet heading back at me. She was the full circle nightmare weaved into the thick of my dreams at night.
So if I'm being very blunt, I would not say this album quite hits the same heights of Dolls of Highland. The high points of that album, damn near close to untouchable, at least to me. But man, Kyle Craft aimed high, taking some of the most claustrophobic production to his more personal narrative with a blaring flair and ready charm that made this album so easy to love. Kyle Craft has easily been one of my favorite new songwriters of the past couple of years, and with a healthy injection of self-awareness, exquisite meter, and huge hooks, this guy's a great poet, hands down. He takes the wreckage of his past romances and spins them into gold with incredibly well-balanced framing and humor to boot. Indulging in retro sounds but never feeling like a throwback, Full Circle Nightmare by Kyle Craft was a treat to go back to every time. A guy who can take glam to new heights and feel in the modern era and doesn't deserve to be slammed by critics who can't pick up basic text, because it's easily one of the best of 2018 and surprisingly progressive to boot. Check this out. It rules. Number 5. Alright, look, I'm not saying that me seeing an artist live didn't help get albums or songs onto my list. In that case, I would put money on it actually happening. But for the full-length debut to be this good, coming off of a mixtape I could never quite love as much as I wanted, yeah, this was a treat indeed.
I know everyone goes someday. I know my body's fragile, know it's made from clay. But if I have to go So I pray my soul is still eternal and my mama don't forget about me. I pray my mama don't forget about me.
Room 25 is hard to analyze. Half because Noname's kaleidoscopic flows feel ever so slightly evasive. Half because her production is low-key but layered in a way to say so much more than without words. And half because she's just that great of a writer to overstuff her bars with subtext, and yet you get the impression you're not quite hearing everything. There's more to the story. And yet that distance has a charm to it, especially surrounded by some brilliantly textured jazzy instrumentals, striking melodies, an embrace of real hooks that you wouldn't quite expect, some stellar guest performances, and Noname's incredibly subtle but magnetic personality that absolutely does translate live. This is absolutely an album that reflects a ton of growth and maturity, and a voice that you'll be very wise to pay attention to. And when it comes to chill hip-hop that can still pack an emotional wallop, doesn't get much better than this. Definitely one of the best hip-hop albums of the year. Check it out. Number 4. By far the latest entry onto this list, but man alive, I'd be kicking myself if I didn't get to it sooner. It's the best country album of 2018.
Hey, pretty little mockingbird, keep singing them sad, sad songs. It's already rain on my window. I'm dying when the morning comes.
I was looking for reasons to not give Rustin Kelly a chance. I'll admit it, I knew enough of his background to be wary. The critical buzz didn't seem all the way there. The hype only seemed to be confined to a few small segments. And yet when I'm this wrong, I'm wrong. Because this album knocked me on my ass hard with brilliantly subtle country flavor in his production that not only took real risks, but allowed Rustin Kelly to get introspective and vulnerable in a way that most men in country don't know how to process with this level of maturity. With a fantastic knack for storytelling, Rustin Kelly shows the human consequences of hard outlaw living with an unflinching gravity, and just how much of those projections limit men like him from finding more of themselves in order to love and be loved. And again, like the best albums on this list, it's so jam-packed with potential singles and hits, you almost can't present an easy entry point behind the album itself. But for me, 2018, yeah, I needed this. Looking more from you, Rustin Kelly. You set one hell of a bar. Number 3. You know, it's funny with this album. It seems easier to dismiss than her past albums. On the surface, it doesn't quite seem as ambitious or high concept. It's got more of a contemporary pop flavor. It doesn't seem to be trying as hard, at least on the surface, which seems to be the easy out for a lot of critics not giving this as much attention. These critics are wrong. Here's why.
Dirty computer walking by. If you look closer, you'll recognize.
You know, I've made the statement a number of times that while it might be easy to make a pop song, to make a truly great pop song that sticks in the memory with unique personality and accessibility, you need someone special. And if we didn't even need any more proof, Janelle Monáe shows up to do it yet again. The funk and R&B flavor, you knew that was coming. The elements of space rock and soul, that's an added bonus that of course I adore. But the pop, the hip-hop touches, the trap, they're done so convincingly that you wonder why in the Nine Hells streaming playlist were so cowardly to not give her all of the promotion. Was it because she was doing it so much better than pretty much everybody else? I think it might have been. But what's inspired about Dirty Computer is that there's just so much subtext surrounding queer theory, systemic racism, and sexism, and Janelle Monáe's own personal drama amidst all the pop flourishes, painted a little bit broader, maybe in some of the surface, but still with real layers beneath it. And when you factor in how she does go for broke in the subversion of American cultural tropes, look, I'll say it again, Dirty Computer is a tour de force that might not be for everybody, but it's got all the populism to embrace us all, providing you're up for a very different world. Frankly, I am. Number 2. The last 2 albums on my list, the best way to describe them is that they contain multitudes. They're not making it easy. There's a density to their vulnerability that can be both discomforting and hard to process, made by women who aren't about to shy away from that process and expression. And if we're looking for the album that grew on me the most in 2018...
I love you better when you're wild. Suits you better if I say so.
Hell On is tangled. Hell On is massive. Hell On is literate and challenging in a way that very few were prepared to face, critics or otherwise, even if they were Nico Case fans. It was tumultuous by design. It was overstuffed with hooks to make it seem accessible, but then seemed to contort itself a half dozen different ways to fly down the rabbit hole and then into the sea. Like with Janelle Monáe and Noname, the sexuality is brazen in the best possible way, and then only adds more nuance. And when then you give it all to Nico Case, who might just have one of the most expressive and dynamic voices in rock and indie rock, you're dealing with a confounding project that's on a different level, no way around it. And I'll admit, it took a while for me to fully digest it. Just going back to it for this list revealed more layers and flourishes I had missed nearly just a half a year ago. But between containing some of her best ever songs, a cover that surpasses the original, and a wisdom and a wit that is defiantly her own, Nico Case made a tour de force that I think has intimidated too many people to really approach it. And yet you should. It's one of her best, and one of this year's best, deserves so much more attention. And finally, number 1. Really, you all knew this was coming. It's not a surprise if you watch my content. This is exactly what you would all expect. That happens on some of these lists, that's how it goes. But for those of you who are new, or in the back who you're not paying attention, wake up. Here's one last reminder. At this point, I've talked so much about Dessa's chime both in and out of videos, it's hard for me to say that there's new things for me to mention. But the truth is, just like with Hell On, I keep finding more details that I love about this album. Sure, you might not call it straightforward hip-hop, but she runs circles around so many of her peers both in and out of the underground that you can't really deny Dessa. And then when you pair it with steps into synth-pop and R&B that are as convincing as anybody else in the subgenres this year, she proves how she can straddle genres with aplomb and master them. Her writing is boundlessly creative but accessible and heartfelt and incredibly literate. Her politics are provocative to everyone and with the layers to spur some of those uncomfortable conversations. I know this. I shared this album with a ton of friends of mine on the left, and you could tell songs like Fire Drills got under their skin in a way they couldn't quite deal with. That's saying a lot. And on that topic, this is the first album that if I didn't confine myself to the 3 songs per album rule for my last list, I could have easily had 5 songs in my top 20 from this album. Not even the albums I gave perfect scores to in 2016 has ever had that distinction. In short, I've called this Dessa's magnum opus, but I'm more than confident than ever she's only beginning to give us more. Hell, she didn't even stop this year. She wrote a book and put that out too. It's actually pretty great. In fact, let me go out on a limb here. If Chime does not place Dessa in your top 5 conversation, listen to it a few more times, then get back to me. It's the 3rd album on this channel throughout over 1,000 reviews that I've only given a 10 out of 10, and for the 100+ times it seems like I've revisited it this year, it only proves how much it belongs there. Album of the year in 2018. Let's see if 2019 can match that. But until then, hey, leave your comments down below what your albums were of this year. Like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Let's see what sort of tumult is awaiting us. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.